managers are more receptive to it now because they have gotten the message about people wanting local and organic. And it's better coming from the grassroots up than when you get the corporate down, the corporations who are all now touting regenerative products because they realize that it's a catchword. Consumers are going to buy it. They can charge a premium, but the greenwashing is so rampant that it's much more, it should be a grassroots movement from the bottom up. So talking to your local grocery store, if your child is in a charter school, or you're on the staff of a hospital, or you're on the staff of a college, how can we get that procurement piece to address small and medium-sized farms?
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast. I'm Linley Dixon, co-director of the Real Organic Project. We're a grassroots, farmer-led movement with an add-on organic label that distinguishes crops grown in healthy soils and animals raised on pasture without synthetic fertilizers or toxic chemicals. You just heard from Nancy Matsumoto, the James Beard award-winning author of Reaping What She Sows, How Women Are Rebuilding Our Broken Food System. Her book documents how women across the country are creating an alternative food system. And I interviewed Nancy last fall about some of her conversations with women on small dairies, fighting to survive, and with millers and processors working to rebuild regional grain economies. Her reporting highlights not only the farmers, but also the unseen links in the supply chain that really make organic food possible. So I hope you enjoy hearing about why women are so often at the forefront of this work, about the structural changes they face, and about how eaters can help strengthen regional food systems. This weekend at the EcoFarm Conference at Asilomar in California, Nancy will be moderating an all-star panel of women discussing how they are rebuilding supply chains. Both Dave and I will be there, and we will also host a Real Organic Project roundtable discussion on Friday, January 23rd, with Executive Board member Paul Muller from Full Belly. This is going to be at 1:30. Please find us, say hello if you're at the EcoFarm Conference. All right, welcome, Nancy Matsumoto. You're the author of Reaping What She Sows, How Women Are Rebuilding Our Broken Food System. Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast.
Thank you, Linley. It's great to be here.
I would love to learn a little bit about what brought you to writing this book in your life personally.
Well, I've been writing about agroecology and regenerative agriculture and food systems for many years now. And I've seen over the years how there are all these gaps in the food system that these, I'll call it an alternative farmers or alternative food system. So first of all, I saw gaps in the supply chain that women and men both were trying to fill. And I saw a lot of amazing women do incredible work on the front lines of rebuilding or fixing our broken food system. And so I wanted to really show what I call the alternative or alt food system that these women in my book are forging link by link in the supply chain, and put it into stark contrast with the other food system, which is very long supply chain, very extractive, very opaque, and is run by big food and big agriculture. And I think most of us live in a food system that is really like the air that we breathe. We just don't know that we are being manipulated by big food and big ag. And so I thought by in each chapter showing a group of really incredible, intrepid women who are working very hard to forge this alternative food system, and then show how they are rebuilding or building from scratch these short, direct, and transparent supply chains, and then contrast that in each chapter to how the big food, big ag system works. And then people might have a light bulb moment like, oh, I get it. These are two choices. They're very stark. Because, in all of my writing, you hear farm to table, you hear sustainable, you hear regenerative. And it kind of seems like a good thing, but people don't really understand what it means. And they don't have this holistic view of what that system looks like and how hard it is to build, how hard it is for women to get, farmers to get to profitability, to get their products to market. And so I wanted to really talk about everyone along the supply chain. So it's not just the farmers and the fishers and the ranchers, but it's the miller and the niche meat processor and the packer and the distribution people and the people who provide warehousing and the people who provide that last mile transport, and show that it's a very short and direct, but it still takes a lot of work to build it. So that was kind of the idea behind this structure and wanting to do this particular book.
Yeah, I recognize so many names from the Real Organic Project, some of the farmers that we work with too. I think it was always impressive to me to see how many women were first generation farmers out there, were choosing to farm with organic practices, and were also really highly educated, and then decided the best way to save the world, the best environmental choice would be to go out and grow food for their communities. So I loved that you focused on women, because it seems like a much higher percentage of organic farmers are women than conventional. Is that what you found as well?
Yes, absolutely. And you're a great example. And so you see it in the work that you do. And I certainly saw it in all the reporting that I did. It's not to say men aren't doing amazing work out there, but so many of these initiatives were women led. And whenever I would approach a farmer or a rancher or whatever and say, "Do you want to be in my book? This is what it's about," they would immediately say, "I totally love that it's about women, because that's what's moving the needle in my area of the work that I'm doing." And so I got a lot of validation about this approach, and people seem to intuitively feel like, yes, this is where change is happening. Women at this point in our history are not the typical leaders of farms. They're not the owners. They're not the people who are inheriting. They're not the people who have the best access to agricultural education. So they do tend to be more on the margins and the periphery. And when you need big systemic change, it's not going to come from the powerful center or the top. It's really going to come from those margins where people are looking to innovate, realizing that the system isn't working and trying to figure out how to make it better, and just more in a position where they can take risks. So I think it's a lot of things that go into making women a really powerful force in this movement.
I'm curious how you found some of the people that you wrote about. I recognized Abby Corse, the dairy farmer up in Vermont, and Drew
Oh,
Rivers, and
yes.
Conda Mason, and Jubilee Justice, Karen Washington. These
So
are all
many
people that
great
we've interviewed. So I'm curious how you found them.
Yeah, so many great women, all different ways, really. First, long history of reporting. Some of them I had talked to before for different stories and wanted to go back to. Corey Carmen is one of them. And then some of them, like Conda Mason, I was involved in I think I was reporting on a growing culture event. And she was one of the farmers that were in that conversation. And I immediately recognized what she was doing as totally fitting in with this book. A lot of it was just doing a lot of research and talking to people I know, and them referring me to other people. Some examples were, I had a few ideas for the regenerative winemaker, and some didn't pan out. Some I couldn't reach, and so I just talked to so many people and ended up finding a really perfect person, I think, for the book, Alice Anderson in Santa Barbara. I also, yeah, and the mezcal makers too, Zina Cantan, they also came from a long chain of research and being referred to different people. But then I also have really trusted people who have been working in this field for a long time, like Kathleen Finley at the Glenwood Center for Regional Food and Farming, who is a super connector. She suggested a lot of people. My friend Mary Cleaver, who is sort of an OG in the good food movement in the New York area. And she also is connected to so many people. Everyone knows her. And so she was a great source of suggestions, and all really wonderful women. So just kind of a lot of different ways.
Yeah, and I love that you kind of took it subject by subject based on, the product and the type of farm that they were. I was curious if you wanted to just highlight a couple. I'm visiting these farms, the stories really stand out. Are there a couple that you just want to highlight and tell their stories?
Yeah, well, from produce, there's Veritable Vegetable. Full Belly Farm is an amazing story. Started at basically, the same time as Eco Farm was starting. So what,
40
40,
plus years ago.
40, 45 years ago.
Yeah.
And Drew right there at the beginning, met her husband, Paul, at I think the second ever Eco Farm. And then to think that they have been going on as long as that and have built this incredibly diversified farm, so many different product lines. And it's really a model of how you can be a completely organic farm and be in this alt food world and yet have an amazing reach, from over 1,000 CSA boxes, but also just so many things, flowers, value added products, a lot of it. So it's a good role model, I think, for young farmers who are just thinking, how am I going to make it work, and how do I make the economics work? It shows that it is possible. I really love the story of Sonia Strobel in the oceans chapter, because she's someone who has built her own alt fish system from the ground up, first by marrying into a fisher family, and for the first time in her life tasting really good seafood, even though she grew up in Vancouver, British Columbia, right on the water. Because she wasn't getting local catch, it was not possible. And when she realized how financialized the fishing industry was become, how huge it was, and how it was just controlled by gigantic companies that were really trying to extract money out of it. It was, a private equity kind of play. And thinking, we should be able to get food direct from fishing families, starting her own little fish CSF called Skipper Otto, named for her father-in-law, and then just building it from 40 subscribers to now 8,000 across Canada, and representing fishing families in 3 provinces. So to see, and it's kind of like a lot of these women didn't know what they were doing. It was like learning as they go and figuring it out, and figuring out, okay, now we have a market, if we can process it right at the right after it's caught, flash freeze it, we can start distributing it farther and reaching more people, adding more people to our fishing families. I love that she really targeted Indigenous women fishers who she felt, and then there's a whole long history in Canada of the fisheries, and how outside the mainstream they have been put. And so really to try to make it as inclusive as possible, and spending months and months building relationship with women who are not inclined to trust a white woman who is just coming in and saying, I want to help you.
Uh-huh.
So much of it is about relationship building. But yeah, those are a couple cases that, I mean, there's so many good stories in the book. It's
Yeah.
hard to pick.
Yeah. I really love that you included Abby Course when you were talking about the dairy struggle, because that's an issue that Real Organic Project has taken on. We've talked with Abby quite a bit. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what you saw in the grass-fed dairy community,
Yes,
and big dairy coming in and that struggle.
Abby's a wonderful spokeswoman. She's a generational dairy farmer, I think fifth maybe. Um, but it really, that group of grass-fed dairy farmers really ran the gamut to first, new farmers, first generation to generational. And what I loved about this chapter is I was able to connect with this group that was so tight knit and would meet on Zoom regularly to share techniques, to talk about what was going on with their herd, but a lot of it was really mutual support, because this was an incredibly tough time for small dairy farmers like that who are all grass-fed grazing. And it was the most heartbreaking chapter to report and write, because I worried about the mental health of some of these farmers. They were not getting paid what it takes to produce the milk, so they were really underwater. And you could see Abby's father, who's such an amazing dairy farmer, really picking and choosing his words very carefully when he was trying to explain that this was the case. And then Abby is so passionate and is trying to juggle motherhood, children, being, the next generation. So what I saw was a lot of really tough decisions being made. Some of the people in the group having to actually reduce their herd size because counterintuitively they were going to probably have a better chance at being profitable because it was going to just cut down on expenses. And the tough thing is you're always trying to balance creating milk with regenerating the soil. And so, a certain amount of energy has to go into the soil, and a certain amount of that grass energy produces milk, but you need that balance. You want to really have a beautiful regenerative pastures, but you also need to be profitable. So that path towards profitability is so difficult. And the story I tell is of, organic starting the beginning of sort of the organic milk boom when there was a real premium. And some farmers, I mean, Abby's father himself says, he got into organic because of the premiums, then realized it was the absolute way he should be farming. It was the way his father believed in farming, and it sort of all made sense to him. So a lot of farmers, when they first got into it, they were doing very well because they were kind of riding on that organic premium. But then what happened is the incursion of very big dairy and the creation of what many of my sources called organic and name only dairy. So it had the organic label slapped on it, but giant herds, mostly in the West. And then there was the pulling out of Danone from the Northeast because, it was just going to be cheaper and more efficient to grow in the western part of the United States. So all of these things sort of compounded. There was also this period where farmstead cheeses were a really great way to profitability. You could do that value added piece and you could keep afloat. And this wonderful consultant that I spoke to, Rose Wilson, talked to me about how that was the panacea for a while. And then sort of the bottom fell out of that market. And all she was doing is writing bankruptcy plans for people, exit plans, and how depressing that was. And I kind of zero in on the difference between the way the American dairy supply system works and pricing and the way it does in Canada, which is a system called supply management. We're actually caring about matching supply with demand. The reason so many commodities in the US and in a lot of part of the world are such boom and bust is because no one does that. There's, either too much or too little, and prices are very volatile, and the farmer really can get burned and left holding the bag. So, when I reported this chapter, it was an extremely depressing time for these farmers. But kind of the good thing is that after the book went to print, I've talked to several of them and things have improved. And a lot of it is because of some of the people that I mentioned in my book who are sort of involved on the legislative level have really gone to state government. They're working on the federal level too to say, look, this is not working. We're all losing money, and we're all going to go bankrupt. Talking to Organic Valley about it, and they're trying to fix their pricing, and so a lot of different parties sort of came on board to try to make it better. So what I've heard is that it's not so dire now, and this is just it's this cyclical nature. I don't know if that's what you're hearing, in your, because you said you've been working with Abby and the dairy farmers, but I'd be interested to know what your take on the current situation is.
Yeah, we talked to a lot of the dairy farms in New England when Horizon pulled and Danone pulled out of sourcing. I mean, they were selling milk all over New England as Horizon, but they weren't sourcing from there. And it was kind of a slow build because what you were talking about with the cheese making, they had farmers that had contracts with them that allowed for some of the milk their milk to be diverted for cheese making. And then as
Mhm.
a way to kind of cut costs, they basically, for the small farms, having to go and visit all these small farms and just get a small amount of milk, they basically said, wrote up contracts that said you can no longer divert some of your supply for cheese making. It has to all come to us. And so that put, these contracts are what made so much strain
Right.
on the dairies. I haven't heard that it's gotten better because the organic CAFOs out west are only growing and
Mhm.
consolidating. I mean, we're talking 15,000 cow dairies. And, they've got pictures on the cover of their milk cartons of a cow on pasture. So
Mhm.
there's really
Mhm.
no way to differentiate. And,
I know the greenwashing is terrible, and I
yeah,
write about that too. It's so hard for the consumer. And Abby's father was saying, look, if you go to a store and you see Organic Valley and Horizon, you can be sure that Organic Valley was a local farmer, and you don't have that guarantee with Horizon. You're not supporting local. And
yeah. And the
yeah.
problem, though, is that as the system consolidates, some of these brands are forced to actually use the same
Hmm.
processor. And
Yeah.
so that guarantee is no longer necessarily there for them because a lot of the local processing has gone away as well. So
Yeah.
milk does get pooled. And
Right.
maybe you could talk a little bit about the nutritional benefits, why it even matters that to maybe the customer for their health. There are a lot of environmental
Hmm.
reasons, why grazing is
Yeah.
something we want to support, but we could talk
Um,
about the health benefits as well.
yeah. Yeah, so University of Vermont, I believe it was Heather Darby and Sarah Flack were involved on a study. It's sort of a long, ongoing study about the nutritional superiority or difference between grass-fed organic and, conventional. And the results have been very promising so far. Everything from sort of the organoleptic, sort of mouthfeel richness to actual linoleic acids. The fatty acid profile is much more healthy, and that's true of grass-fed beef as well. When you've got animals grazing on grass and they're accessing this rich, very diverse soil, it's just way more nutrient dense. And I think that's an area that a lot of research is going on in, and I think we'll be seeing more. But the preliminary studies definitely show that these conjugated linoleic acids are much more beneficial, the profiles, and it's a real difference. So I think people knowing that, and then knowing that these animals are living a really natural sort of the way they were meant to be brought up on grass and not on grain. um, and then the environmental benefits of drawing down soil, increasing moisture retention, climate resilience, just making the farm more resilient to climate change as well. All of these things, I try to show the multiple benefits of these alternative food systems, and on so many different levels, they're just so much better than big agriculture or conventional food. And really trying to get people to see that this everything is sort of interconnected, and it's humans, it's human health, it's the richness and the vitality of rural communities where these farms are located. It's the way the animals are treated. It's the many environmental co-benefits of growing this way. Um, you know, I've talked about the how important it is for me to belong to a food co-op and to go to the local farmers market, because this is my community and it's kind of the highlight of my week to do that. So I just think on sort of a human, scientific, environmental, animal rights, kind of spiritual, all of these realms come together, and it's just really a powerful thing to support. And if you have children and you're thinking about the future of the health of your family, it's very important too because of these kinds of nutritional benefits that we've talked about.
I'm curious. I mean, a lot of farms are able to direct market, like you talked about Drew Rivers at Full Belly and the CSA model. And I'm wondering for, dairy, for example, it's a lot more difficult. You have to have the processing on the farm. Grain farmers, it's more difficult to do that. What is sort of the next step beyond that direct, customer farmer, know your farmer relationship that some of the strategies that these alt food systems can use in order to find markets and find the people that actually want to buy their food outside of
Mhm.
direct marketing.
Yeah, I talk a lot about connecting of networks over across state borders and even international borders through knowledge networks and sort of community building. What's really amazing is to see how it's a small world. I was at a farm dinner in Rhode Island sitting next to a fisherman who was trying to create his own direct um, consumer supported fishery. And I mentioned Sonia, and he said, "Oh, I love her. I know her. We talked about her story." And he said, I'm really happy to talk to you. It sort of validated that I'm on the right path, that I can do this. And Sonia is involved in these national organizations, and Canadian is linking with the American local catch, I think it's called. And what they're doing is they're trying to network this movement so that, you might not, you might live in Vancouver, but you can be helping people in, Rhode Island to build their network. So not necessarily that you're trying to grow things and become a long chain, sort of mimic big food, but you're going to have a series of small to medium-sized networks that are really in communication and sharing knowledge and sending people to visit each other, to learn from each other, and to sort of help spread this word of this way of growing and eating. I saw it a lot in the grain world too, where I talk about the baker John Woodward in Toronto being very close to the people at Washington State University Bread Lab, and having this social media group that's international called Imagine Biscuits. And so she has all of these like-minded bakers in the UK who are part of their regional grain sheds. So it's this kind of, and I said to Dawn, I'm going to London, which bakery should I go to? And she gave me the names of several, and I'm going to write about them to show how what they're doing is very similar, and how, again, the message of the book is wherever you live, if you really look around, you're going to find this alt food system in your backyard, and you're going to be able to support it. So it's not that I want to see things getting massive, but it's that I want to see these knowledge networks linked and helping each other and supporting each other, and really sort of, I guess, just having the average person be able to conceptualize that this is a thing, that there is this growing alternative way of thinking about growing, sourcing, and eating food that is way better for them and our planet. I don't know if that answers your question, but
Definitely. Yeah. No, one of the scariest things to me is as some of these organic pioneers are transitioning out of farming and retiring is that knowledge base disappearing. And some of the farms are not handed down to people that necessarily know, the have the knowledge base that the farmer who'd been doing it for 40 years has, and it's been hard to watch
it's
that
so
happens.
important. Yeah, I mean, it was Abby's mom who said to me, the peer-to-peer learning is the most important and the most satisfying, and what they like the most out of being in Organic Valley is when you have these farmer meetings and getting together and sharing knowledge. And it's whether it's dairy or ranching, I hear that from everyone, that that's what really gets them excited and really is joyful for them.
Yeah, no, I feel so grateful. I mean, I've even had that just through the connections that we've made being part of the Real Organic Project. Dave Chapman, who's my co-director, has been, just on the side, such a mentor to me in growing tomatoes on our farm. So I really think that that elder-younger connection, I mean, he can save 40 years of mistakes by just talking to me about, what worked and what didn't. So I
Right.
really feel that that's an important part of the story is how to do that. Yeah, transfer of knowledge. I'm curious. We often talk about the farmers of high integrity and their systems, but we forget that there's so many different links in the supply chain to find distribution that has integrity and shares these values of supporting a more regional supply chain. There's the retail side. Just curious if you could talk a little bit about the vital role that these other links in the supply chain have in
Yeah.
this story.
I feel like there are a lot of unsung links to take
Yeah.
grain to start with. You would like the story of June Russell is so wonderful, really having to re-regionalize the grain system of the Northeast, and or Amber Lamke at Maine Grains, same thing. Farmers were no longer growing small grains because everything had shifted to the move to the Midwest with the commoditization of bread flour and the bread industry. So even though it would be beneficial for them to grow these small grains as cover crops or in rotation, it was really hard to get the farmers to even see the benefit of it. And it was coaxing, like in Amber's case, going to them and saying, okay, will you do this for us? But also saying, what is our plan B going to do? Because she didn't want them left in the lurch if it turned out to not be profitable.
Uh-huh.
Similar to when I wrote about sake, and sake makers were trying to get farmers to grow heirloom varieties of sake rice because they were way better flavor, made beautiful sakes. But just like all heirlooms, they're lower yield, they're much harder to farm, to cultivate. No one wanted to do it. And so some people were paying premiums out of their own pocket just to like get the supply chain started. And so you see it at the farmer level. Um, Amber couldn't find the old, beautiful millstones that were used in the old days, so she had to go to Austria to research them and source her first mills. Um, I've talked to many farmers. When you're doing small to regional, you can't even get the combine or the equipment because it's all been supersized. And you're talking about those massive combines of the Midwest, and one farmer, Mary Cleaver's husband, had to get his little combine from Ohio and get it shipped to New York. So many things that just the supply chain has atrophied, it's disappeared, and getting it back online is really hard. Mine Wen, who is a farmer Mai in California, she's got a wonderful project where she wants to help small vegetable farmers also add on small grains, but it means helping them buy the equipment and then teaching them, giving the technical knowledge of how to repair that equipment. Really, there are so many steps to creating, kind of the really diversified small farm system that you want, that it's very thoughtful people like Mai who's thinking, okay, how can we plug these holes in the supply chain and make it as efficient as big ag, which is completely vertically integrated and so seamless because it's only profit driven. It's like, how are we going to do it and make the most money out of it? You need to have the same efficiency here, but it's in service of regenerating the land and feeding people much more nutritious and delicious food, revitalizing communities. So there's one of the obstacles of what these women are doing is they're doing so much that is unpaid, all those ecosystem services, which big food and big ag made huge profits on by extracting and basically externalizing all those costs. So that's part of the sort of the David and Goliath picture that's going on, is they're doing a lot and a lot of really good things, but not necessarily getting paid for it. So
Mm.
those are just a few examples of yeah, the sort of like gaps in the supply chain that take so much effort to and thoughtfulness to fill. It's very hard work.
And even, just as an eater, thinking about it, it could even be the same product that you're buying from a local cooperative versus, a big chain. And just thinking about, does this retail outlet actually create some shelf space, for a regional product that's available seasonally? Or have they stopped doing
Yes.
that, even demanding those types of things? Are there other
Yeah.
things that you can think of that eaters can do to kind of support?
Yeah, I was just doing a story on my for my local co-op on this great cocoa cooperative based in Ottawa, and they were talking about how they tried to add on new products, and the whole battle of just getting retail space was a huge unforeseen barrier, and one of the things that made them pull back on some of the new products. So that retail end is really hard. I talk about the role of people like chefs in really getting the message out, so sourcing local grains and saying this is why I'm doing it, because they're kind of now role models, or people sort of look to chefs to see what they're doing. They're trendsetters. So I talk a little bit about that chef piece. I try to make the book as actionable as possible. How can we as individuals move forward the alt food system? And I give a lot of tips, everything from, yeah, going to your local grocery store and saying, why can't we devote this, a shelf to this local farm or this local producer, and really trying to just push them to do more local procurement, and saying, we want this, and we want to support them. And I think that kind of thing can really, managers are more receptive to it now, because they have certain gotten the message about people wanting local and organic. And it's better coming from the grassroots up than when you get the corporate down, the corporations who are all now touting regenerative products, because they realize that it's a catchword. Consumers are going to buy it. They can charge a premium, but the greenwashing is so rampant that it's much more, it should be a grassroots movement from the bottom up. So talking to your local grocery store, if your child is in a charter school, or you're on the staff of a hospital, or you're on the staff of a college, how can we get that procurement piece to address small and medium-sized farms? So that's a really huge way to get lots of stuff moving in the right direction from the alternative food system. Um, I think food policy is so important. So if your community doesn't have a food policy council, maybe you could try to start one. If they do have one, you should see what they're up to and get involved and see if you can help push your community to more local sourcing and more. And there has been a huge loss with the cutting of the farm to school program. And that was, a huge amount of money that was really, you know, moving massive amounts of produce from local farms to schools. And when you look at the amount of money that school food buying amounts to, I think I heard the number the other day, like 148 billion. It's a huge amount of money that goes to buying school food. So you can imagine if you start getting schools on board with local and organic, that's really powerful. So a lot of different things that people can do. One farmer in my book gave the example, her son is in a college dorm, and his whole floor, they opted out of the food plan, the meal plan, and they pooled that money and they started getting weekly shipments from a local organic farm. And then there was very community building, because they would all take turns cooking together, and
Mm.
they really loved it, and it was a great success. So I think, and so many more colleges now have farms on them. I really love seeing that too. Can our college farm helps, you know, feed us?
So much in there. I love that
Yeah.
you focused on the chefs. I saw that Dan Barber was able to, give a recommendation
Yeah.
from your book, a nice quote.
Mhm.
And we interviewed him extensively about bread. And I remember having a discussion with someone about they were just outraged that there was a $12 loaf of bread. And I knew the story behind that loaf of bread and that it was
Mhm.
all local small grains. And I'm curious if you have a good answer. I mean, I definitely took it on, but what your answer might be to somebody who's outraged about the choice to have that $12 local organic bread on the shelf. It's not that that's what everybody is paying, but at least to even have that option there, and why it might be, if you can afford it, justified to spend $12 on a loaf of bread. I wonder if you can answer it better than I did.
Yeah, I mean, I write about the affordability and the accessibility part. Grass-fed beef is another example of something that can be quite expensive. And I was talking to Athena Petty, who's in charge of the sustainability issues at New Seasons in Portland. And we were talking about how every single person, including me, makes trade-offs when they're at the supermarket. I'm going to put my organic dollars to X, Y, and Z because that's a priority for me. So for me, it would be produce, meat, fish, proteins, and maybe like my co-op has big discussions about the organic toilet paper, and there's so many things that you can put money to regenerating and doing good, but we all have a limited budget and we're all making choices. So I would say for me, I think these kinds of $12 loaves, I mean, I don't know if I pay that much. I don't think I do. But
Well, the
these,
problem is the more
whole,
you know, the more you actually want to. You know what I mean?
yes,
It's like the more
right,
educated you are about toilet paper, you realize you
right,
want to cut down the boreal forest. So it's just like the more you
absolutely.
learn, you kind of want to support all of these
And
things.
so you're picking and choosing all of the time. I mean, I
Yeah.
think with the bread, the fact that I know that I'm supporting a regional grain shed and taste. I mean, I think taste is such a huge thing. Like they're just worlds apart. Something like this locally grown, milled and well baked bread, just you can't compare it to a supermarket loaf. And so that alone, I'm willing to shell out more money because of the happiness it brings me and the feeling that I'm supporting a local grain shed. um, I would encourage people. I mean, my co-op sells all these same flours, and it's not that hard to make bread. And one of the
Hmm.
most fun things to do is make it yourself for a fraction of that $12 and
Yeah.
really enjoy delicious bread. It's like the way I say the best thing is to have your own garden, grow those vegetables. The next best thing is go to your local CSA or farmers market. So I think it's all about how can we be part of this movement in a way that our budget allows. And maybe you're not going to buy the $12 loaf every week. Maybe you're going to buy it whatever once a month or once every 2 months, and you're going to try experimenting with your own baking and see what recipes you can put into your rotation and improve your own diet that way. So, and also the more we support and grow these alternative food systems, the more there's going to be that sort of volume, the scale, the efficiencies, and the price coming down because there's just more of it happening and more of it moving, and it becomes not so much the alternative, but the mainstream. So I want to see, conventional and alternative come together. So they're really sharing a lot of really good practices that makes it much more democratic and affordable.
Mm.
Um, but that access piece is real.
Yeah, yeah. And even just, if you buy one loaf a week and have less bread, and then,
Hmm.
like you said, the nutritional content in that bread is going to be so different than something that's just white
Yes.
flour. So that's something
Hmm.
that you can take into account as well.
Yeah, with
Um,
meat, I talked to a salumi maker, and I don't need a big steak. I can just get some of her salumi and have it on the side of the plate, with a lot of
uh-huh.
grains and vegetables, and be really satisfied because it's so delicious.
Yeah, yeah. I'm curious if you want to talk a little bit. You mentioned a bunch of add-on labels, and including Real Organic Project in the book, and you talked about Regenified and Regenerative Organic Certified, and all these third-party certifications. Would you talk a little bit about the role that they're playing and
Yeah, I mean, it
keeping
sort
in
of
mind?
comes out of the discussion in the book about how rampant greenwashing is and how hard it is for the consumer to know what is real and what is not, and what is really doing is going to be healthy and nutritious and does all the things it claims to do. And, so the ideal is, your farmer, you talk to them. We can't all do that, obviously. Then the next is, going to a reputable place and seeing all these third party certifications. And this is why there's so many that have popped up, because they realize that there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of, how do I know this is, legit? And so I think the problem now is there are so many of them. And so one of the things that I encourage people to do is, look up a brand, because there's a lot on the internet that you can find out about. There are a lot of brands where there have been consumer advocacy organizations that actually have lawsuits against them because they're not literally living up to their labels. And I won't name names, but if you're sort of wondering that this sort of seems too good to be true at this price point, you can Google it and see what you look it up. One of my sources, Lisbeth Pacheco, who is an amazing Guatemalan woman who's doing direct to consumer at her little roastery in Florida. So she's getting beans from small cooperatives. This women win run that I visited, and just roasting and selling really fresh beans. And one of her lines was, if the price and the marketing seems too good to be true, it probably is. And the other hint she gave was, the more actual facts and information you can find on a label, the better. If you just have one little line that says 100% whatever, um, eco certified or grass fed, or you might wonder. But if you see a lot of information, the more information, the better, that you can really feel like some confidence. But I also encourage people not to let the perfect be the good of the enemy and just be, frozen. Like, I can't buy anything because it's, how could I have complete knowledge of what's going on? Um, you have to make the most informed choice. Try to read as much, learn um, as much as possible. Talk to. I mean, I was curious about these hemp hearts once. Like, there was conventional, but then there was organic. And I called them up and I had a really interesting discussion with them, and it really clarified a lot of things. Um, so depending on how much you want to get into it, you can dig up a lot of information yourself. But again, these labels are, I mentioned Regenified and how they're very outcomes based. And that's one of the things that is touted as being something much more solid and meaningful than some of the other certification criteria. And then I also mentioned Regenerative Organic Certified, because they've been growing and doing a lot and are backed by three kind of leading companies in the sustainability: Patagonia, Dr. Bronner's, and Rodale. But I am curious about the Real Organic, and I want to just hear more about that from you, because I didn't mention it, but I know that it's something that's, really important.
Yeah, probably grown quite a bit since you did your research on the book. I'm going to have to call out Regenified. It's me that's doing this, not you, but I can't let it go in a podcast without saying that, Regenified does a lot of no-till with chemicals, and that has actually shown not to increase carbon over time. They've really done those studies. So it's something that we are not promoting that label, just concern about the outcomes. It's process based is how organic always has been. And, I can prove that my carbon levels are higher is a really difficult thing for farmers that have, maintained soil organic matter over generations, to say, well, I'm, getting more
Yeah,
soil organic matter. And obviously it fluctuates time of year. Even same time of year, you send it to two different labs, you'll get different
right.
results. So saying we can know these things with certainty is a really big concern of mine with the regenerative movement that is so focused on outcomes and not looking at the process of how they get there. First of all, I'm
That's
concerned that the
interesting.
outcomes are real,
Yeah,
but I also think that how you get there is really important.
that's very interesting. Thank you for adding that. I didn't know that. It's an example of, you're reporting, and there's always stuff that you're not going to know, or you're not, it's very tough, but
Well, like you
it's good
said,
to
there's a
know.
sea of these certifications, and the devil's in the details.
Yeah.
And so I always look at whether or not they allow chemicals or not. And most of them say
Yeah.
reduced, but to me, that is not a that's too wishy-washy, you know.
Hmm.
So I prefer
Hmm.
organic certifications.
Yeah.
Um, but I do think that's interesting, this whole shift away from processes to, well, we're going to prove it, you know. And ecology is a very complex
Yeah.
subject. So I worry about how they're going about trying to
I
prove,
guess it's
and
trying
the
to
carbon
give the
market
consumers,
tied to all that.
yeah, it's trying to give that consumer certainty, like of
Yeah.
actual numbers and statistics and outcomes. But I agree, its process is so important. But then how do you, that also can be wishy-washy to pin down and to describe and to verify. So
Especially if the processes aren't being enforced, like you discussed with the,
yeah.
you brought up the contentious hydroponic issue, how the Real Organic Project was formed. And so I'm curious, just, you know, kind of as an eater and not a farmer, how did that hydroponic issue land for you when you were researching it?
Well, I've always wondered, and it's something that I would love to write more about because Ontario, Canada, where I live, it's a huge industry, and I want to know more about it. I always was a little skeptical and a little, they don't compare to the late summer tomatoes that you get, the organic heirloom tomatoes. I mean, they're just, that's in a
Yeah,
class of
no
its
doubt.
own. But it's sort of like if you live in a cold climate like I do and you want a decent tomato, this is an option. I always wondered about, just I mean I do believe that the nutritional aspect is never going to be the same if it's not soil based, but and I grapple with this in the book because some of my sources tell me that it's lower load of pesticide, very efficient on water use, tends to be, I mean, at least the companies that were being discussed with me um, treat workers really well. And so even people in sort of this good food movement are accepting it. I know that there was that huge rift over whether it should be allowed to be certified organic. And I do live in Canada where it's not allowed for hydroponic to be under that label, and the EU is the same. And I think I would prefer that. And then just have very transparent labeling. This is hydroponic. These are the benefits of it. Just explain to the consumer, because I'm also very conscious of not everyone being able to afford this outrageously priced heirloom tomatoes. And, everyone should be able to have access to a good tomato. So I think that trying to, on the one hand, really advocate for democratic access to good food, but also really supporting the soil-based farmers who are doing really hard and important work and allowing them to differentiate themselves. So I think the transparency issue, the hydroponics should be really very clearly labeled, and people can dig into it themselves and say, well, is it important for me? Um, but I was at Climate Week in New York, and I went to a food tank seminar or workshop, or a session that was very much based around the UN food program. And the director was talking about how hydroponics in Kenya has been an incredible lifesaver and lifting people from starvation, helping to lift people from starvation to foods, being food secure. And so, I don't think that we should ignore it as a food solution, especially if it means the difference between starving and not starving, and giving someone a delicious tomato that way, or, a pretty delicious tomato. But yeah, so I kind of grapple with all of this in the book, and I just say, ideally, we'd all live in a system where all of us could have soil grown, really good things. And maybe one day, if everyone embraced the alternative food system, that would be possible. Um, but right now, because there is this kind of extreme wealth inequality in America, and there are people who really don't have the means, the more democratic you can make better growing practices, maybe not perfect growing practices, to me, the better.
Mm.
because, I want more people to not have to eat pesticides on their tomatoes. And if hydroponic is going to help them get there, as long as they know what it is and know the trade-offs, I'm not against it existing. But I do think that the soil-based farmers really need to have that. I talk a lot about it in the book. It's that value added piece that allows you to decommoditize a product. You have to differentiate it. And if you are just mixed with everything else, then you don't have that differentiation that is going to allow you to charge a little bit more for it and make people understand the value of it, the true value of it. So
It's
it's
so
very
interesting to kind of,
complicated.
yeah, it's so interesting to hear where you've landed on all these things. So many of the things that you figured out, lack of transparency, but also the consolidation in the industry, so that if you're a local soil farmer, you really don't have the opportunity to put your heirloom tomato on the shelf, which actually is cheaper than the ones that are provided year round and tastes, like you said, a whole lot better if it's in
Hmm.
season.
Yeah.
And that's always what I encourage is, for farmers to, or for eaters to actually, buy their heirloom tomatoes in season from the
Hmm.
farmers. But what has happened is they taste so horrible in the grocery store now because they're
Yes.
actually not even really heirlooms. They're hybrids that, look like heirlooms. So that automatically they don't taste as good. They've got thicker skin. They're built for shipping. They're picked green. And then by the time you get them,
Oh
they're
my
so,
gosh.
and
And
what's
they're
that?
labeled heirloom.
But what that's done is it's completely made the customer base think that heirloom tomatoes taste bad. And so
Yeah.
when the local farmers have them, not only do we not have the shelf space for them anymore, but people don't know how good they can taste. So it's a whole
Yeah.
re-education. Um,
Yeah.
but I
So,
also was interested to kind of hear you talk about, in the Southern Hemisphere, these hydroponic facilities. I just want to say I've spent a lot of time, in some of these countries, Kenya included, and the Pacific Islands, where a lot of outside money gets invested in these
mm,
very high tech systems that no
mhm.
local farmer could ever afford to do on their own as like a gift,
That's
like, here's, isn't
interesting.
this cool? And
Yeah.
so there's a lot of vested interest in making it look like this is like a small local thing that we're doing to
Yeah.
benefit. And it actually is the tech, like as soon as it breaks, I saw so many that were just abandoned. And it's very input intensive. So you're going to have
Mm,
to constantly buy fertilizers. I mean, for the whole fertility of the crop,
yeah.
if you think about all the high tech facilities to run a hydroponic
Mhm.
feeding of, the second those break down, the plants die.
Right.
Whereas
Right.
if you're growing in soil, you can, compost and have, you really don't have to buy anything.
Yeah.
So this kind of desire to, I don't know. I think some of them are just like projects that look like a benefit, and so they're like fronts for the hydroponic
Yeah.
industry.
Yeah.
Um,
And I'd be
so
very
that's sort of my
interested.
take on it. I saw a lot of abandoned ones because the
Wow.
gift
That's
came
really,
and then they can't sustain it. But it's also a
yeah.
power situation where people just don't have the money to invest in, and so inevitably, if there is one, it ends up being
Yeah.
a power structure of who's got the money to
Yeah,
own
no, it's exactly what I
facility.
saw in the cacao and the chocolate industries. Another form of colonialism where, foreign
Yeah,
governments, big money come in and it's boom and bust and it goes down and they leave and the farmers are left in the lurch. I
yeah.
guess, yeah, I would really want to know how much of it is benefiting the local community and how many local farmers are involved. But I mean, this is why it's so complicated.
I know, I know. I loved how many things we shared in common though when you were talking about the benefits. But some of what you said, I did see their talking points in there, like it saves water. And
Yeah.
yet they put these facilities in place in the deserts because there's more sun
Hmm.
there, and they're
Hmm.
totally draining aquifers. Trying to feed the
Oh,
world from the desert, and then they're
yeah.
touting water savings when
Yeah, that's
the energy and even the water. They're just looking at the water in the production, not
Yeah.
necessarily, they have these reverse osmosis systems, to even provide the water,
Yeah.
which you then have to rinse
Right.
the filters, and that uses a ton of water. So it's just, like you said, the more you know, the more you really want to make that connection directly with your local producer. And I
Yes.
think that's kind of the conclusion that you came to. As much as
Yeah.
possible, grow your own and
As much as
support
possible.
these regional food systems. Are there any other closing thoughts that you want to end with here?
No, I just hope that people read it and really feel empowered with a lot of knowledge and really have fun reading about these incredible women because I love the people that I talk to. They're all doing amazing work. They're all really passionate about their land, about their animals, about the regenerative work they're doing. And it's incredibly hard. So they have to be driven by that sense of mission, that sense of community, and really, trying to build something from the ground up. So I hope it just, it empowers people to change their behaviors a little bit and to really look for these alternative food systems around them.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much for writing about
Thank
this topic and
you.
for bringing up bringing to the forefront so many issues that the Real Organic Project is working on. So we'll
Yeah, thank you for
definitely
the work you do.
spread
And
the
this was,
word.
thank you. This was a great interview. I enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening to the Real Organic Podcast. If you have a spare minute today, the single most effective way you can help us grow this movement and others to find this podcast is by leaving us a rating and a review wherever you listen to our podcast. You can find a video version of this interview on our website or on our YouTube channel, and you can join us every Sunday for a new episode featuring voices from the organic movement. And if you haven't already, please sign up for our weekly newsletter at realorganicproject.org/email. See you next time.